Odd choice.
Odd choice. He's the most beat up character in Family Guy, but fair enough. Back it back.
Well, I prefer to be called Mark. And
Oh, you're moving.
sure. And I guess I'm from Preround, Texas. And I prefer to be, and as for cartoon, I have to go with Tom and Jerry.
That's 2 cartoon characters, not 1. Fair
Okay,
enough.
Tom.
Okay.
All right, Jesuit.
I'm from Richardson, Texas. I go to Jesuit. My favorite cartoon character is Avatar: The Last Airbender.
It's okay, we're calling each other.
Yeah, you're Jesuit anyway. All right.
I'm Jason, I'm from Dallas, and my favorite cartoon character is Eric Cartman from South Park.
Okay.
Way to put me on the spot there, Jason. Steal mine. Okay. Well, I'm Jared. I'm from Dallas, also I'm his brother. I'll go with Kyle from South Park.
Okay.
I'm Ronaldo, I'm from Non-Magnet. So I'm going to go with Fur.
Alright.
All right.
At least you're not Ivan.
I'm Eric, I'm from Dallas, and I guess I'll go with Woody.
Okay, fair enough. Nothing interesting or provocative in any of that. That usually you get somebody that says something crazy, but fair enough. All right.
Meg doesn't qualify?
Meg's, I mean, it's still like a main character on a main TV show. It's not exactly like anything weird or anything. Usually the girl who like, what?
I didn't have the same thing.
Oh, it's your favorite cartoon character. It's not like you need time to really think it through.
I've never actually thought about it before.
Well, there you, I just blew your mind. Opening of the lecture. That all that took 30
The
seconds.
Inception button.
Yeah, boom. Somebody get the Inception button up. Okay, a couple of things I'm going to talk about at first and echo largely what Dan kind of said. Obviously, theory is one of the coolest parts of debate because, and it's also one of the most lame parts of debate. We invent the rules as we go along, which is a really interesting and different thing. I go to UT Dallas, and we don't have a football team, but we have 2 things which are going for us, which is chess and debate. And so it's kind of cool because they love us and dump a bunch of money on us. But you can't play with the guys with the chess team the same way you can play with debaters. Like, they're pretty serious. Like the pawns, you know, they move in certain orders and things like that. They're not really into a phallocentric critique of the king-queen dichotomy. They're not into any of that stuff. They don't buy it. They don't really care. There are rules. They've been laid out for thousands of years. But debate, we invent the rules as we go on as the round begins and as the door shuts. What was Dan talking about when we talked about in-round versus potential abuse? This is kind of an important distinction. Anybody remember that? Did you all just blank out in that part of the lecture?
It was on Tetris.
Tetris. Don't make me start calling you out. Jesuit.
Can you repeat the question?
What's in-round versus potential abuse?
In-round abuse is when they actually do something that you consider abusive, while potential abuse is something that they wouldn't be able to do if they were able to do what you're trying to say is bad.
Good enough explanation. Why did Dan say that it isn't really relevant? Or kind of giving an indication that it's not really relevant, that distinction? What do you got to guess? $1 million prize? Theory is fundamentally about what you justify. Whether or not in-round abuse actually happens or not, or whether it's potential abuse, and how that impacts your decision-making, and whether or not the theory you've advanced for how debate works, i.e. whether conditionality is good or not, it doesn't matter whether or not the abuse actually occurred. Like Dan talked about, you know, you can read diss ads to prove an abuse by when like the team no links and say, ha, abuse. You know, that doesn't really prove abuse. You can create scenarios for abuse. Ultimately, it's about what your theoretical argument justifies. Now, this is distinct from abuse that actually occurred. So, for example, if the team concedes a disadvantage to a counter plan when they kick out of it, and then use that as a new link argument on a criticism. So, for example, like you say, well, you know, if you do the state's counter plan, and that's going to lead to, you know, the economy collapsing, and that's really bad. And they say, we'll kick out of the counter plan, concede that. However, you maintain that, you know, you want to help prop up the economy. That's a new discursive link to our criticism. That's kind of an example of how in-round abuse can occur, and one of the ways you can demonstrate how abuse has occurred in the debate because of conditionality and the nature of conditionality. He also talked about reject the argument, not the team. I agree with him that in terms of theoretical statuses of counterplans, like dispositional or conditional, that argument doesn't make any sense to me. Like, if you're conditional and then your answer to conditionality bad is, well, kick the argument, you know, or just kick the argument out of the debate, get rid of the counterplan, that's fine. That's literally just saying, be conditional. That doesn't answer it. The thing that I didn't think he quite mentioned was other arguments, such as other theoretical objections, like plan-inclusive counterplans, maybe certain types of crazy permutations. Those are arguments where you can definitely say, reject the argument, not the team. That argument was just kind of a test. Or just, that's an argument that's out there. It doesn't really skew the debate because I said, Perm, do the plan, and then said something that's completely intrinsic. So these are all different ways in which you need to start thinking about kind of how these arguments interact with theory and what you should do, just to make sure to clarify up a couple of points. All right. One of the problems with this lecture is that I have fairly loose interpretations in terms of how most theoretical arguments work. Everything in theory comes down to basically a combination of what you can defend and what your judge's predisposition is. I largely, for the most part, have no visceral reaction to any argument, and I don't think anything's bad. You can literally stand up and read a conditions counterplan that has like no solvency advocate, and while I don't think that's probably legit in a theoretical sense, I wouldn't see a reason why I just vote against it ad hoc. And so one of the things you need to understand about theory, and this was emphasized a lot, is that it comes down to largely what the judge is willing to do and what they kind of accept. As part of this, and I think this is a good thing that Dan said, no judge wants to vote on theory. Like nobody sees the pairing and is like, oh sick, I'm gonna get to vote on, dispositionality bad. Like how many of you actually want to come into a debate and be like, I want this debate to be about conditionality? If you do, then you're messed up in the head, because that is crazy logic. But no one really wants to go for theory, no one really wants to hear about theory or make a decision based on theory. Dan said it was because he doesn't want to tell the other team they're cheaters. I disagree with that. I don't care what I have to tell you at the end of the debate why I voted against you. That doesn't bother me. I'll call you a cheater if I think you're a cheater. Although usually at the end of the day I just tell you that you debated that argument poorly and here's how you should make it better. But keep in mind that people have predispositions and you got to kind of recognize that. As a side note, almost every judge will recognize that theory is a necessary tool. It's part of what makes a good speech. There's a reason why when we talk about counterplans, we use the spot analogy or the stop analogy, where the T in that is theory. It's just part of the arsenal that you need to use in order to beat different arguments in debates, because otherwise the other team will get away with murder. And other judges will recognize that, when you're totally screwed on an argument, maybe because the argument's unfair, or more than likely because you're just getting out debated on it, that sometimes you have to push all in on theory. And they will respect that, or for the most part. So you got to kind of understand who your judges are and what they're willing to do. Adaptation is obviously key. Some people think that, some judges hate conditionality. Some judges think that conditionality cool as long as there's no argumentative contradiction, i.e. you can't read a state's counterplan and then like a capitalism K, because those two arguments would link. Some people just don't care about anything. Some people just don't care about theory at all and won't vote on any sort of argument. Some people will just don't care about theory, but will vote on an argument if it's advanced and debated well. That's kind of where I'm at. I cannot for the life of me understand a reason why plan-inclusive counterplans are bad. It literally is to the point where I can't even think of arguments to write up for it. But at the end of the day, if it's debated well, I'll probably still vote on it, just because that's who I am. Other people who are really smart, really good judges would never ever vote on it, even if it's dropped, would be what some people's standards are. And I can't quite go that far, but you have to understand everyone has their personal proclivities. Like I said, I have some crazy ideas on theory. Like Dan kind of talked about for a second, the idea of the affirmative being able to read multiple plans. I kind of think that might be the future evolution of policy debate in order to check the ways in which negative conditionality has gotten out of hand a little bit. But, maybe that'll happen, maybe that won't. Can you imagine that world where you have to debate multiple AF plans at the same time? Yeah, it seems fair. You get multiple counterplans, I should get multiple AFs. I don't know, something to think about. I bet you that's a development that could potentially happen. All right, to start this out and to try and breach the issue a little bit, is anyone familiar with Catch-22? Yes, no, maybe? Yes, one person. You, Mark.
No, never mind.
You raised your hand, boy.
I have the book.
Well, have you read the book? Have you just folded open the spine so it looks red? Impress me. Yes, that was a concession. Yes. Catch-22 is one of the best books written ever. It's probably my personal favorite book. It's about basically a guy who's fighting in World War II. He's a pilot, and he tries to get out of combat duty by saying that he's crazy. And the doctor explains to him the reason why he cannot ground him for being crazy, even though the doctor readily admits he is crazy. And a Catch-22, as a more general argument, gets referred to as a paradoxical situation where an individual can't avoid a problem because of contradictory constraints or rules. And I'm going to show you the clip of the video where the doctor explains this, because I think this really teaches you a lot about theory.
I've followed 35 missions by Christ. Now that sadistic man has raised the number up to 50. In any other outfit, I wouldn't rotate after 25. Doc, you gotta help me out.
Look, I'm due for rotation myself in a couple of months if I don't cause any trouble or break any rules. And one of the rules says I can't ground anyone just because he asks me to.
Can you ground somebody who's crazy?
Of course, I have to. There's a rule that says I have to ground anyone who's crazy.
I'm crazy!
Who says so?
Ask anybody. Ask Nathan, Doc, and what? Hey, tell us.
Tell what?
Am I crazy?
He's crazy, Doc. He won't fly with me. I take good care of him, but he won't. He's crazy, all right.
Yes! That's proof they're gonna do with that crazy.
That crazy.
And when you ground them?
Why don't they ask me to ground them?
Because they're crazy, that's why.
But because they're crazy, I have to know that. You can't let crazy people decide whether you're crazy or not, can you? to be crazy to keep flying. But if I am to be grounded, that means I'm not crazy anymore and I have to keep flying. You got it. That's catch-22. There's some catch on catch-22. It's the best there is.
Alright, so what does that teach us about theory? Two important things. One, basically if you can figure out a justification for the rules, then you can basically justify any set of rules, no matter if they're totally unfair or illegitimate. The second thing is that, more importantly, is that you will oftentimes find that in theory debates, teams, when they're justifying their interpretations, will kind of make interpretations that seem to a certain extent fair and orderly and logical, like, I get one critique and one counterplan. But if you're affirmative, ultimately that puts you in a terrible double bind because you're forced to read offense against two positions that arguably could be contradictory, and which they could concede offense on one and apply it to another. That's the catch-22 kind of double bind. It puts you in a situation where the rules of the game basically put you in a problem that you cannot possibly avoid. And that's kind of the example that fundamentally revolves around the heart of all sort of theoretical debates. I've also just massively expanded your knowledge of classic literature, so you know, at least you got that out of this lecture. All right, how to debate theory. Theory works just like topicality in that there are interpretations and there are counter-interpretations. Topicality should largely be debated like a disad, which means that theory arguments, much like topicality, much like disads, you need to worry about questions of uniqueness and impacts. One example of how this functions. A lot of people talk about how if you did something illegitimate in a debate, you cheat. Well, what's the ultimate impact of cheating? Cheating in itself, some people will say that's bad, but what is ultimately the reason why we kind of don't want people cheating?
Fairness?
Well, fair. I mean, more than just a one-word answer. What would happen if every time you walked into the room, the rules were set up so you couldn't possibly win? How long would you play the game? Not that long. This is kind of the everybody quits the activity sort of argument. So the impact, and a terminal level impact to like theoretical arguments, is usually people quit the activity and the activity dies. This is usually presumed to be like the biggest impact there is, but we'll talk about that more in a second. Well, what's the uniqueness claim for that question? In order to win that the affirmative or the negative has done something that's cheating that kills the activity, what do you have to win now that's occurring in the status quo? Yes?
That is fair now.
Well, that it's fair now that people aren't quitting and that the activity is not dying or is growing. So the other team, as part of their response to this, and this is usually what happens more in terms of framework debates than necessarily conditionality, but it's just trying to get the ball rolling and get your ideas straight. Other team can argue that that argument about how we collapse the activity is not unique, that the number of people in the activity are dropping now, and so there's no uniqueness for the fact that we killed the activity. In other words, debates getting smaller, debates are already unfair against certain types of teams and certain types of arguments, therefore we're not the ones that killed the activity. Usually this needs to be combined, or should be combined with an argument that says that whatever the aff did or the negative did to cheat would probably be a way to save the activity. This is pretty common in critical arguments where they're like, we don't need to defend policy making is bad, I don't care about the rules because we focus on policy making too much, and that's the reason why people are quitting. We need to talk about critical theory a little bit more and that'll bring people back in. So that's one of the ways that you can generate a unique term of theory. This might be going over your head a little bit, but you kind of just need to understand that like everything in debate, it all operates according to the same rules. And if you start to understand that and you're going to think through these problems in terms of theory, about what the terminal level impact, i.e. the extinction level impact for a theoretical argument is, and also how uniqueness can function in some of these arguments, you'll be ahead of the game and you'll really start to grasp how you should try and debate theory. Terminal level impacts. Okay, so let's talk a little quickly about what the status of different advocacies are. What's unconditional mean?
Sticking with it to the end.
That's right, you can never kick out of the counterplan or the alternative. What are theoretical objections to unconditionality?
Really?
Anything? Bueller? Something? Anything? Bueller? Yes?
Is this about like conditionality bad or?
No, this is
Why would
unconditional.
unconditionality be bad? Why is it bad to force the negative to go for their counterplan in the 2NR the instant they read it in the 1C?
So that the teams don't waste unnecessary time.
No, we're asking why it's bad. Why should that not be the case?
Why shouldn't you be allowed to read an unconditional counterplan? Okay, this is a slightly trick question. Basically, there really isn't a solid argument why unconditionality is bad. Usually that revolves into the negative doesn't get to counterplay, or there's no negative fiat, or in a world of critique, the critique requires a policy alternative, which is basically just a different way of saying framework. There largely isn't a reason why unconditionality is bad aside from just the negative doesn't get to counterplan, which has been an argument that's largely been dismissed or is just no longer really debated out because most people accept that the negative at least gets to read one counterplan at a time. So now let me ask you this question though. what does this have to deal with? Well, who's the only team in the debate round that has to be unconditional? Yeah, the affirmative. When you're aft, you always have to defend the plan, on all of the plan, and every part of the plan, and you never get to sever the plan. Let me ask you this though, if a team stands up and says, we read a counter plan, how does that impact your strategic thinking in the 2AC? They've read a, all right, let me put it like this. They've read a counter plan with 2 disadds. One of the disadds is the net benefit. The other disad probably links to the counter plan. What can you do in the 2AC to save a bunch of time if the counter plan is unconditional? Yeah. But now what does that mean? Do you have to spend any more time answering it then? Are you going to really just concede the entire disad and put it all on what links to the counter plan? Well, it depends on what it is. If they readily admit it's like, no, this argument links to the counter plan, then you don't have to answer it. Because they're never going to be able to get out of that counter plan. So it's literally like, yeah, you wasted 90 seconds reading a federalism disad that linked to your counter plan. That links like your XO counter plan or something. Alright, all I have to do now is basically say this links to the counter plan. You've admitted it links to the counter plan. Maybe I'd read a card, but I don't really even know why I do that. And then I go on and I'd answer the rest of the disad, the other disad. I'd save my time there. This is the process that you gotta understand. And once people start to declare a theoretical statuses for their arguments, it begins to interact and impact every other argument in the debate. And if somebody screws up and says unconditionality for their counterplan, or unconditional counterplan, then either they've got the goods on your ass and they're about to whoop you, or they probably have made strategic mistakes that are going to allow you to not answer arguments, like case debates or something like that. Like there's no point reading an unconditional counterplan that solves the app and then having a huge case debate. Like you can probably just get out of that entire case debate, assuming of course all those case arguments also apply to the counterplan, and then just go ahead and push on. Does that kind of make sense to people? If it doesn't, we can go through and draw it. No? Well, let me ask you this. All right, let's talk about like this. Do you know what an executive order counterplan is? All right, do you know what all right, so the president basically, aside from going through and making laws, can basically sign these statements. Usually they're used to like create national parks. Sometimes they're used to like give orders to the military. They're called executive orders. They we in debate basically pretend that they have the force of law, and really far more law than they actually do. So if you read 2 disadvantages in the debate with the XO counterplan, one is a politics disadvantage, which basically says if you pass legislation, Obama's going to have to get in a huge fight with Congress, and that's a problem. So we can just have him issue an executive order, and he can kind of sidestep that fight. And that means that you avoid the politics dissad. Suppose your other disadvantage was federalism, where you said anytime the federal government does anything to mess with the states on transportation, that it violates the principles of federalism, that basically collapses the government of the United States. Well, you argue, I mean, clearly, if you do an executive order, you basically do, that's still the federal government acting, and it's still doing all of the plan, so they're still messing with the states. So, you know, that federalism dissad still applies to the executive order counterplan. So you can largely just say, the federalism dissad links to the counterplan, not going to answer it, moving on, here's politics. That kind of makes sense? That's how one of the ways it functions. So, this is going to get a little bit more complicated when we get to dispositionality. Yeah, a little bit more complicated. God, I hate dispositionality.
It's not a thing.
Yes, it doesn't exist. All right. Everyone cool on unconditionality? Conditionality. What is conditionality?
Where you can kick it at any, you can kick whatever you read at any time.
That's right. You can kick it at any time. That's the meta theory of conditionality. Anybody know what limited or logical conditionality is? Limited logical?
Is that where you kick it when there's no offense against it?
No, that's not quite it. Everybody else got a guess? If I said, if I read a counterplan, and I only read one counterplan, and I say it's conditional, is it really all that bad for the affirmative? I mean, I know I get to kick it any time, but it's just one counterplan, yo. Come on, guy. That's kind of what limited logical conditionality is. Basically, it's an interpretation of conditionality. It's like a subset of conditionality that basically says, I get one advocacy that's conditional. That kind of makes sense? This is usually people's like interpretation, this is usually people's like counter-interpretation of how conditionality should function when they say, if you say my counterplan, if I say the counterplan is conditional after the 1NC, and the 2AC reads conditionality bad, my 2NC can be like, our interpretation for why conditionality is good is we get one conditional advocacy, you know, that's not that bad of a deal, it's reciprocal with the affirmative, you get a plan, we get one counterplan, we get to kick it any time and revert back to the status quo, and they'll make all the arguments why conditionality is good, which we'll talk about that more here in a little while. But does that kind of make sense as to why that could be a good reason? Because what's ultimately probably one of the worst things that could happen for you if conditionality is good if you're affirmative. Probably somebody who's standing up and reading like 10 different counterplans, right? That would probably suck to deal with in the 2AC. So your argument is kind of limited logical conditionality checks that. It's basically like, puts the brake on there and says, we can only do one, we'll only ever do one. So basically you got to defend the status quo, which you read 8 minutes of offense to when you read your 1AC, or you got to go for it, or you have to answer our counterplan. And there's only one counterplan, and if you're doing your work, you probably know how to do it. as a separate point on this, anybody know what pre-round conditionality is? Yes, no, maybe? Yeah, stupid. Well, it's an interesting idea that makes sense in terms of education. Part of their argument with conditionality and why it's bad is that people are like, well, we don't learn about anything, you know, and part of the reason why people say conditionality is good is that we need to learn about a whole bunch of different things at once. So basically we need to read like several different counterplans against the app in order to test it in all these multiple different worlds. One of the arguments the affirmative might make is that when you were researching these counterplans before the debate, that you took the time to like think it all through and how it interacts with our affirmative, and so the education has kind of already occurred. So there's no reason why you had to come into this debate and read 9 different counterplans. You could have just read one. Instead, you got all the benefits of reading and researching and learning about those 9 different counterplans before the debate. And you got to make a choice, which is what's key to critical thinking about which one is the most strategic. So all those benefits that might occur from conditionality happen before the debate round, really. Now you're just basically screwing with the competitive equity of the debate. And that's what pre-round conditionality kind of is. It's an argument that says that conditionality is not good because there's a lot of stuff that you did in terms of researching, preparing, and doing your strategic thinking before the debate started that really solves all the benefits of conditionality. All right, the final point on conditionality for a second, or the theory behind conditionality for a second. I really don't think limited logical conditionality makes a lot of sense. The reason why I say this is that if you've justified the theory of conditionality, i.e. that I get to read an argument which I can kick out of at any time, it's kind of irrelevant whether you get to read 1 or whether you read 10. If you've justified 1, you've justified them all for the most part. And honestly, the only reason why people say limited logical conditionality is so that they can have a defensive argument to this slippery slope. You'll just read 30 different counterplans argument. If you're so worried that people are going to beat, or if you're so worried about like you're going to lose to an argument that you could read too many counterplans, you probably shouldn't be reading conditionality in the first place. That's kind of how I feel about it. And if you justify 1, you've justified them all. And so we're going to talk about later on here why, you know, there's reasons why conditionality is good and bad. And that's kind of one of the reasons why we want you to really make sure you're on top of this. Because if you understand the theory as to why it's good that the negative gets to test the affirmative in multiple worlds, then you'll understand why conditionality is good and you can justify 1 counterplan, 5 counterplans, a counterplan, and a K. Alright, so for conditionality, what about strategic options? If the negative stands up and reads a conditional counterplan, what can you do? Can you concede stuff? How does that work? What should you be thinking? Who right here are 2As? Who gives the 2A seat? You're my people.
Should all hate conditionality. Come on.
Yeah. I was a 2A for most of my career. Come on. Do you get to concede anything? Can you do what we talked about with unconditionality? No. It's unfortunate, but you pretty much have to assume the counterplan can get kicked at any point, because they're bastards. And they'll do that to you. So you basically have to spend all the time in the world answering every argument as thoroughly as you possibly can.
Can't the app kick advantages though?
You can kick advantages, but that's not really, kicking advantages and kicking disadvantages really isn't quite the same thing as like conditionality, because that has to do with the advocacy you're reading as opposed to the advantages that stem from the implementation of that advocacy.
Yeah, if the negative team reads a disad and the app says non-unique, Obama will lose now, and plan makes Obama win, the negative can't kick it. There's nothing they can do to get out of it if that's all the app reads. But if you say we should have the states do it and all the app does is state action bad, the negative with conditionality can just wish it away simply by saying, right, not going for the counterplan. And all those offensive arguments, reasons why the app should win relative to the counterplan, go away. Whereas with the disad, all the reasons that are offense, the reasons why the app should win still exist because the app still makes Obama win.
Yeah. I mean, you are right in the sense that the best way to make up ground where you have multiple conditional arguments is to probably take like the one case advantage that you think is the weakest and probably has cards on, and then just jettison that one and kick out of it, and then go and like answer everything else. That's how you kind of help create time in the 2AC, the trade-off. Really what you have to do is you have to make sure your blocks are tight, you're fast, you're efficient, you know what cards you want to drop out of like your 2AC blocks that you know that if you don't have time to read them all, and then choose which arguments you want to kick out of on the case debate, like which advantages you want to kick. You can never really kick solvency. So that's just kind of how you do it. That's one of the ways you create time and make time back up when there's a bunch of conditional arguments in the debate, but it's a serious problem. Let me ask you this. Do you think there's an issue in terms of conditionality with maybe contradictory arguments?
Yes.
Yes? No. I mean, that's actually a pretty interesting subject for the debate. Do you think if I read a critique that talks about why capitalism is bad, and I also read the fiscal discipline dissent, do you think there's a tension there?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a tension there. Do you think that that's one? Why do you think the affirmative should lose, though? Or why the negative should lose? Sorry. You all just said no.
Because they're forcing you to pick your poison. You either go for you attack the cap K, and then you can't, like, they link to each other. So like you say fiscal discipline's good, you link into their cap K. But they always just kick the cap. They always just kick fiscal discipline. You go with the cap K.
Yeah. And I mean, normally I'd say that honestly, that probably isn't the more, a disad contradict with the K, that's going to happen. You know, it's a conditional advocacy that I can kick out at any point in the debate. So if they don't work together, you know, whatever, I'll just go for one, or I'll just go for one at the end of the round. That's usually what checks like the contradiction there. But you hit on what is the right argument. It's far more troublesome. And this is kind of the example I outlined earlier when it's two different advocacies. So like, for example, like, I mean, fiscal discipline's a decent one because, you know, obviously you can extend, if someone stands up and says, we save the economy on fiscal discipline, then they can say, well, that's a new link to my capitalism argument. And it's the same thing with counterplans I talked about a while ago. If you read a state's economy dissad to a state's counterplan, and then also try and answer the capitalism K, they can concede that, they can basically, you know, concede the counterplan, extend that you save all these states' economies, prove that you help support capitalism, and make that a new link argument to the capitalism K. So that's kind of how, that's the multiple contradictory worlds, and how that creates the chance for a team to, you have to read offense against both, because they're both counterplans. Arguably against fiscal discipline, you're not forced to read offense, but ideally against any sort of advocacy, you're going to have to read offense. And so you need to say that the problem is that in a world where there are contradictory arguments, offense can be conceded to basically, you know, create offense on other flows for the other team. And that's why ultimately this multiple worlds, possibly contradictory arguments is bad. There's also a performance element that if you really want to get into that, but that's not really relevant to this lecture right now. Yeah. And I also don't want to talk about it. I personally think it's legit, whatever. Suck it up.
If the negative proves the app is a bad idea, the app should probably lose.
Yeah, that's the answer. The other thing is too, is you can also impact turn fiscal discipline, say you collapse the economy, and then say that also solves the cap K. So I can cross, you can cross it, you're right, the negative can abuse me by, you know, kicking out one argument and extending their offense, but I can also, if I'm smart in the 2AC, I can impact turn the right argument and then take out both arguments. Yeah, so it works both ways. And that's probably the best negative answer to that argument. All right, dispositionality. What is it?
Ned?
2AC, somebody? Somebody got a guess? SpongeBob's? No idea? Never heard of dispo? About over here. Eric, you know what it is. You sat in the lecture. I literally gave you a lecture on what dispositionality is.
But I don't really know how to explain it.
Try. Take a crack at it.
You can still kick it out if the app doesn't put offense towards it or something.
That's, you have the right idea, the wrong conceptualization. So, kind of something like that. There's definitely conditions under which the counterplane can be kicked. Part and two.
Isn't it just like under certain conditions you can kick it? Like if they attack a certain thing or...
Yeah, under certain conditions. So what are the conditions where you can kick it? There are basically two of them. What does every counterplan need in order to be a legitimate argument? Competition, right? You can't just stand up and say, do the app, vote nay. You know, like that doesn't work. We wouldn't have an activity. So there has to be a reason why it competes. So if the argument on dispositionality is that if you prove that the counterplan doesn't compete through like a permutation, which a permutation essentially says that there's no difference between the two, the counterplan and the plan. So if you make a permutation, then you can kick the counterplan. Or if you prove the counterplan is theoretically illegitimate for a reason other than dispositionality is bad. So what will be a reason why a counterplan is illegitimate aside from its status? Something, anything, anyone?
Given like many examples of those.
No solvency advocate?
Thank you, Rika. No solvency advocate. It's a plan-inclusive counterplan. It's a consult counterplan. It's a condition counterplan. It's a condition, consult, plan-inclusive counterplan. They rolled it all up into one and really stuck it to you. Those would be examples of reasons why the counterplan is illegitimate, not related to the status, and those are reasons why you can kick the counterplan. Otherwise, and this is what's really beneficial, and this gets into our strategic options talk, what does this mean for the affirmative? What can you then do to the negative that can really hamstring them if you're smart or if you've done your research? What would be a reason why you wouldn't want the negative to be able to kick out of their counterplan? Counterplans require competition. Competition means there's probably a net benefit, like a disadvantage. So what would you do to a disadvantage that begins with an O, F-F-E-N, F-S-E, that's right, offense. If you turn the disadvantage, and only turn the disadvantage, and say, I'm not going to make any other argument to the counterplan, then you can basically say, haha, you're now stuck defending a counterplan that has a net benefit that I've turned, which is now just a disad to you and an advantage to me. So basically, you can stand up, moot the entire counterplan debate, and stick them by just turning the net benefit. Now there's a whole other little business here where people will get shady and say that solvency deficits or arguments why the counterplan links to net benefit disprove competition. That's stupid, don't worry about that, and don't make those arguments. That's ridiculous. Kind of makes sense? Dispositionality is kind of going away, partly because it's really confusing. I also don't think it's legitimate because I don't have any reason why the status of an advocacy should ever be determined based on what the affirmative said to it, but that's my own little thing. And it's really at odds with the fact that I love conditionality, but that's not neither here nor there.
It's also super illogical.
Yeah.
Why should the judge ever vote for something that is worse than not doing anything at all?
True. All right, give me about 10 minutes and we'll take a break. I'm going to push through a couple of things and I'm going to really run through a crazy idea through your head. Everybody know what a floating pick is?
It's
I've heard of
for the
it.
K.
It's definitely part of the K.
It's like when in the 2NC in the block when the negative switches, like they're part of the alternatives and it solves for the app.
That's pretty much it. A lot of times for example, a critique might have like a representations-based link. They might say like, your affirmative is capitalist, you try and increase rail travel and all that other stuff. And in the negative block, they might say, oh, and you read this really messed up representation where you talked about how people work in the economy, and that's super capitalist. What we can do is, we can do all of the affirmative except for that representation, which solves the aff and avoids making that really bad capitalist representation. That's called a floating pick. These things usually don't have text to them. They're just kind of thrown out there in a manner like I just said right there, and if the 1AR drops it, 9 times out of 10 you're going to lose the debate. It's a really shady, shifty tool that's been developed and become very commonplace for the negative. Is it an advocacy? Yes, it's an advocacy. Does it change your original advocacy? It's basically should be thought of as like reading another counterplan in the negative block. Would be the easiest way I think to describe it. Does that kind of make sense? So basically like all of a sudden I decided I read the state's counterplan, you read an argument as to why my state's counterplan wouldn't work, and I read a totally new counterplan to solve that argument. That's kind of how a floating pick works, except it's even more devastating because I basically just made up a random sentence and I just said, you said something, you used one word that's bad. Well, we'll do everything in the app except for that one word. Ha! I don't even have a text to that, I just made that up. And I solved all your app because I said I did. Usually, most of the time, floating picks are run in conjunction with critiques that are run conditionally, which is why whether or not they're actually an advocacy or not, or whether or not the negative has to advocate them throughout the entirety of the debate, doesn't matter. If you get into a debate round where somebody starts to read a dispositional argument, a dispositional criticism for some weird reason, and they start to make floating picks, you should probably ask them the status of their floating pick, and then you can get into interesting strategic options as well. But it's important that I kind of touch upon this for a second so you begin to understand how floating picks are also a type of argument. Now, if you don't know what a floating pick is yet, or you haven't really done any sort of practice on debating these out, you need to focus this time with your lab leaders. Because like, here's what the K-Lab. Alright, K-Lab's going to cheat like hell, and they're going to read these all the time against you in the tournament in a couple days. So you need to get your business together on this, because floating picks are an awesome tool for the negative, but they are the 2A, 1A's worst nightmare. Alright, last thing we're going to talk about for advocacies. Permutations. I said the affirmative always has to defend the plan. They always have to advocate the plan. Permutation, if it's legit, will always include the entirety of the plan text. Do permutations now become advocacies? At the end of the debate, do you now vote for both the federal government and the state government doing it at the same time? Let me put it like this. If somebody reads a counterplan and I say perm, have the federal government and the state government do the plan, and the negative's like, I'm not going for that counterplan, it was conditional, and you say, ha ha, but now we have the federal government and the state governments working together, I'm advocating the permutation, double solvency. Can you do that? No, yes. The answer is yes and no. Yes, you can try and do that if you want to. No, you're probably not going to win that argument with most judges, and most teams will probably say that's utterly ridiculous. Ultimately, the permutation is just a test of competition. It doesn't change what the affirmative does. If the negative in the 2NR goes for the counterplan, in the 2AR you go for your permutation as an answer to the counterplan, and that just means it just proves whether or not the counterplan competes or not. But at the end of the day, if the negative kicks out of the counterplan, you're almost never going to get away with extending the permutation as a new advocacy for the affirmative. You can try and do that. Sometimes you're going to get away with that because the other team's stupid. Now I want to run through a really crazy theoretical idea with you. Suppose you're in a debate, oh God, I shouldn't do this. Suppose you're in a debate where you've messed up on the solvency debate, you're reading high-speed rail, and they read a bunch of cards that say the state governments hate when the federal government tries to impose high-speed rail. They will backlash against the plan, will totally mess with implementation, it's just never going to work for you. You drop those arguments. They read a state's counter plan, and they try to say that we solve all those arguments because we have the states do the high-speed rail instead of the federal government. You with me right now? Suppose that benefits politics or just something simple like that. The affirmative has made a permutation that says do both, have the states and the federal government do it. Because the permutation has us act together, that means the permutation solves all the case arguments. The affirmative has also said plan-inclusive counterplans are bad. And they try to say like the counterplan's illegitimate. So in the 2NR, they went for the counterplan and they do all that. In the 2AR, do you want the counterplan to go away and now have to link to all those states bad or states will backlash against the plan arguments? Or do you want to go ahead and try and let the counterplan stay in the debate just so you can use the permutation to get out of all those state bad arguments that you're behind on because you didn't answer? I can see people's eyes lighting up like, what the hell just happened? What kind of world is it where the app stands up and says, evaluate the permutation first. If the permutation is the best option to vote app, then you vote on it. Otherwise, pick's bad, baby. Like, that's a crazy 2AR. I don't know how that really works. Honestly, I think if you prioritize pick's bad, and if pick's bad happens, the counterplan goes away, which means the permutation is no longer an advocacy, which now means you link to the solvency arguments. But you probably could phrase it as evaluate the permutation first, and if the permutation solves those solvency arguments, then, you know, vote app. That's right, this is what's going on in my head all the time. This is why I walk around talking to myself. This debate has fundamentally made me schizophrenic. And I'm just always having a fight in my head. Question, Joseph?
This is kind of like a different, like, theoretical argument, but what if you made an argument for the judge to vote both teams up?
No.
No, don't ever do that. Why would you ever do that? That's like saying, like, don't vote for anybody or don't concede. You always want to win. Don't vote both teams up. Why would you ever say?
You want that?
Why would you
So
ever
both
say?
teams would win?
Have this happened to you in a debate?
No. I was just wondering.
I would say no, we're better than you. If we're AF, we spoke first, and we presented a better idea. If we're neg, I'd say we probably want some reason why whatever you said was stupid. Vote for us. No matter what. Don't ever.
Ever want the other team to win?
This is a, you
If
play
they were your
This
own
is
team.
competition. You would
I'm
never
gonna-
debate your own team.
I'm going to get the Herm Edwards
Not
speech
true.
up. You
Not
play
Happened
the
to-
game to win.
Happened at regular tournament, not true.
Well, that shouldn't happen. Apparently they debated their own school.
In out rounds it happened. Sorry.
Well, that's
Happened.
different. In the elimination rounds, if you hit your own team, you probably shouldn't debate. Your coach should just make a decision. One of your teams should advance, depending on, and then your school can have your own policies on that. If they don't and they let you debate, that's cool. I think that usually leads to a lot of inter-squad tension. That's not the best way to handle those sorts of issues. Yeah, that's why you just make that decision at the top and move somebody on, and the coach takes the heat rather than the two teams fighting it out. Because I've seen a lot of squads where things go bad over stuff like that. So you don't want that to happen. But no, don't do that. If you're going to do that, you're going to go and say have the other team win and just concede the debate and walk out and go to lunch. And if they're going to make you debate, then I mean, I guess, yeah, just stand there and go through the motions, but I really question the educational value of the activity at that point.
So would the judge just walk out as to try to make?
If honestly, if the other team stood up in the 1 and C and said, you should probably vote for the team, we're going to have this debate out, I'd sign the ballot and leave, because that's a waste of my time.
Okay.
And then I probably would like get chewed out by some high school tab director, and then I'd probably be like, and I'd just leave. I don't care at that point. I'm in this to judge debates among kids who want to win. We play to win the game.
Yes.
Yes.
This is a competitive activity. Competition.
Competition. And speaking of which, we're about to have ourselves a little competition. All right, take 10 minutes. Get your heads together. Think about some reasons why you think conditionality might be bad, like you're a 2AC. So we're going to come back here at 7:55. We're going to brainstorm some of them on the board, and then we're going to give you a little bit of time to start writing some speeches. Because we're going to give speeches and we're going to talk. I'm tired of talking about this, and you all are bored to death. 10 minutes. You play. That means get up. You cannot be in this room. I don't care if you don't want to get up. Go get up, walk around, move around, get excited. Go stick your head in and look in the windows of other rooms.
I have a question.
Yes.
Are you both charged? We all were charged.
Mine only cloud
And you're already like asked and neg is just the negation of the resolution. So like they're basically still in mode that countermeasures have to be non-solvable. And if I come up with anything like challenging, all the other team has to do is say that's cheating, and they're like, oh, that's cheating. Okay.
The sad part is you're stuck in a position right now where there's nothing you can really do. The judges are your judges. You have to adapt.
Yeah, I think
It's
that's
serious.
doing speak English.
I debated in Eastern Kansas. Like, we're not even allowed to really travel so far out of the state borders. Like, we're just not, it was exactly the same kind of debate. There were a lot of judges who were like, they don't even get to counterplan. That's where I was stuck at. And so, I mean, there's just nothing you can do. Occasionally you hope you get a good judge and you can put some of the more advanced theoretical into practice. Otherwise, I'd say work on being really good on topicality, pressing inherency, pressing funding, and reading like one dissat that makes sense to everything. It's like, you know, the heart of the topic, like, honestly, federalism.
I'm just hearing about all this stuff, and then whenever I talk to people about it, they're like, oh yeah, I should bring this back to you so I can lose every
Yeah,
time.
that's really the problem. I mean,
Okay.
the thing is that at some point,
The apps is that we
if you
shouldn't,
start
that
running
Iran is
people
trying to
who are
do because they're dirty brown Muslims that hate America and want to kill us.
It'll hopefully
There's
work out
terrorists.
then.
And we say we should do the
all those
entirety of
things
high speed
that-
rail, but we shouldn't call
Yeah,
Iran
I mean,
dirty
that's really,
Muslims.
that's why, I mean, that's kind of why we're doing the theory groups.
Everything
Sorry,
except
I'm a
for the
little
racist
faster, I mean, I'm more than
function.
happy to like talk you through.
Do the
it.
ad, just
I
don't be
know
racist.
what you're talking
That's
Okay.
fine.
That's good. I mean, there's three statuses, you know, there's counterplans, I mean,
about.
that's where you're at now, like I
What
say,
makes it different from like
me
a regular?
lecturing at you.
Because a regular
Doesn't
plan
really do
changes
that
the
much.
function
I think
of the
probably,
plan
you know,
text.
you're only gonna.
Like the
25
function of
you
the
got
plan would just
25%
implement
of
high
this,
speed
like,
rail,
that's
and it would be
We're gonna try and put it into
low
practice
speed
right
rail,
now, see if we
not
can get
fast
it.
rail,
keeps
and it changes the
happening,
function,
I
whereas a
just
floating
get
pig changes the language that they
Yeah.
use.
It's like,
Floating dirty brown
I don't know,
Muslims
like, I
definitely
just
isn't in the plan
don't
text for
work,
high speed
and
rail.
it's frustrating.
Because, I mean, life's,
You're saying to speaks, that's.
yeah, that's the really hard part is, you know, I don't know, like, I definitely had rounds where it was like, you know, I figured out, I got enough comments that said, that guy had a nice tie about it, I always wore that tie, with judges like that tie. That's the sort of like game playing you have to play with, you know, lay judges that you just kind of gotta do, and it sucks because it's not the core of the activity what makes the activity sweet, but you're kind of just stuck for right now. I would suggest that if you really want to try and find a place where you can go to college, where you can get a little bit more experience like that, and you can actually put these ideas into practice, because it's a lot of fun when you do it. I mean, it's the truth. I mean, it kind of depends on what circuit do you travel to, UIL? Yeah, so, I mean, maybe if you're lucky, you get to go to the UT Austin.
No, that was conflicting with the date of our time. Like,
Oh, move that off that.
yeah, no, we're moving out of it. You know, we like don't have a budget of $2,500.
Oh, yes, you have a lot of time.
It's garbage. It's nothing.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, you're at a smaller
We're
school.
never gonna use that much.
That's
We're
1,500 more than us.
already hitting our district, like,
That's
our
2,500
UIL
more than us.
districts will take all 3 informative extended class, all 3 persuasive extended class, all 3 CX class, all 3 LPS class every year, because there's no competition at all. Like, I'm guaranteed a spot in CX, and I didn't even know what I was doing freshman year in CX. So I was like, they just threw me in the round, and I got first place. And I was everyone's just like retarded.
I totally get that. I was stuck in Eastern Kansas for a time. You never had to look a janitor from East Kansas in the eyes and tell them why we need to spend a bunch of money fighting Russian organized crime as opposed to like, you know, solving like, I can't remember what the dissat was, but it was basically like, spend money on people here, not over there. It was like, Russian organized crime gonna kill us all. He's like, nah, gotta focus here.
There's got like this janitor that's not writing anything down.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's a judging
Oh,
problem, there's nothing you can do. You just gotta either get to a better circuit. I mean, there's grand application myself, I mean,
I was gonna say, we get, those questions, right?
there's
Ricky
no,
Wade into.
this is kind of what Dan said, you're not.
I can't hear you.
People with
The same type of judges you get from Eastern Kansas.
One thing I can say is that
Sorry.
they started to do like judge training
Yeah.
shops, where like
So
you're
let
trying to
me-
like get people in, and like try and give them a little more advanced training. That's one route, because I know we really try to focus. Yeah, that's the problem, is people, you know, it's high school debate, like if you're lucky just to get people to judge, much less show up to a work stop to learn about the So, yeah, I'm sorry, I feel you. Look, if you keep working hard, and after all these years, you can be like this. I don't, yeah, I'm sorry. It's a weird, it's a lot, you get to do it here, and someday if you get in that one debate where it kind of matters and you know
It's just so depressing, all this stuff like.
or you might not get to use it now, but it's the sort of stuff that you go to college one day, then it won't matter for that. So, you know, at least you have some of that.
Todd, do it again.
Baby, you're good. Part 2. Counterpoints have to be right, because you can't just say, do the app, do the neg, yeah, we're all the same thing. And how we compete is a net benefit, which is just basically a code word for a disadvantage. So like when we say, you know, do the states instead of the federal government, the net benefit is politics, because we have the states government, we have the state government's act, which wouldn't hurt Obama's political capital, which gets to get done. And so that's kind of how it functions. Does that make sense? Yeah, just basically a reason as to why you have to prefer the counter plan over the plan. And it's usually a reason why the plan is better. Reasons why the counter plan alone are good aren't really proved with the counter. Never mind, I'm not going to bother with that yet.
Yeah.
You have 4 minutes left.
Are you lecturing more or stuff?
Both.
Why? I don't know, we're talking about like condos good and bad.
So it would be beneficial to continue filming here?
I vote no for it, yeah.
Alright.
No, like, we don't care, like, we can stay here.
Oh,
It doesn't matter.
don't.